Log on to the new Dietary Guidelines for Americans website and you'll immediately see 3 images pop up: broccoli, a carton of whole milk, and a piece of steak. This is followed quickly by the slogan, "Real food starts here." The question, though, is this: does real health start here too? Are these guidelines promoting real health or something else? I think that's worth discussing. So in this episode, let's take a closer look at these guidelines recently released. In this first part, I'll highlight some positive recommendations made and then 2 important things you need to know about the guidelines. I hope you'll walk away with some food for thought and greater clarity into the matter. Ready? Grab a warm cup of tea and let's get started. Welcome to the Plant-Based Eating Made Easy podcast. I'm your host, Anna Zinn, plant-based registered dietitian and transition coach. Hi friend, do you want to regain your health with plant-based eating but feel overwhelmed and lost about how to do it? Do you feel it'll be hard to change your meat-heavy diet and impossible with working, running the home, or chasing after the grandkids? If so, you're in the right place. Here you'll find simple strategies, clear nutrition guidance, and practical tips to help you thrive plant-powered with more energy. So if you're ready to ditch the guesswork and transform your health the stress-free way, cozy up now with a hot cup of tea or listen while you walk, and let me show you how doable plant-based eating can be. Let's do this. One of the things I strive for in my life is to build meaning and connection with others. It's what makes life more precious and worthwhile. Our lives fill with joy and treasured memories when we are able to connect in meaningful ways with others. Think about that playtime passing a football in the backyard with your grandchild, or of taking a walk in the sunshine with a loved one. These are all connections. Friend, I want you to enjoy more meaning and connection in your life too. But I know at this moment that may seem easier said than done. Right now, you may be weighed down by worries about your blood sugar or high cholesterol, or are struggling because of joint pain or anxiety about having a sudden unexpected heart attack. I want to help. Let's work out a plan with simple, tasty meals that will work with your health limitations and busy schedule. Reach out to me at healthnow@plantnourish.com and let's see how we can work together to make plant-powered living happen in your life. I want to help you look and feel your best so you can build more meaning and connection with those you love around you. The new 2025-2030 Dietary Guidelines for Americans were released on January 7th of this year, and they have since created quite a stir nationwide. I've now seen more posts on websites, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and other media channels than I can count. Different social media influencers are offering their opinions, some who love everything about the new guidelines, and others who are less enthused. What's your view of them? Here's part of the reason for the stir and controversy. There's a clear departure of these guidelines visually from the familiar My Plate visual that's been used for the past decade. What's featured now is an image of a flit pyramid shape made of a composite of various food images. This is what the guidelines call the new pyramid. Another big change is that the main guidelines document itself is only 10 pages long, so it's of considerably shorter length than the previous 2020 to 2025 Dietary Guidelines for Americans document. There are, however, more supporting resources provided on the realfood.gov website, such as scientific foundation documents and a daily servings guide. So let's look at these new guidelines now in a little more detail. Let me first point out that there are certain recommendations I fully support and stand behind in these new Dietary Guidelines for Americans. Here are some of them. The first is a greater emphasis and push towards eating more whole, nutrient-dense, and naturally occurring foods. The American public is encouraged to eat these quote unquote real foods instead of highly processed packaged commercial foods with added sugars and sodium, such as chips, cookies, and candy. There's also a continued encouragement to eat vegetables, fruits, healthy fats, and whole grains, along with an emphasis to include a variety of colorful, nutrient-dense vegetables and fruits on the plate. I also appreciate that a variety of possible plant-source protein food options are given within the document, such as peas, beans, lentils, nuts, seeds, legumes, and soy. Besides this, there is continued advice to consider portion sizes, to lower salt intake, to limit alcohol intake, along with a call to prioritize drinking water over other beverages. It's also good to see a section on gut health with mention of vegetables, fruits, fermented foods, and high-fiber foods listed as being beneficial in helping to build a diverse gut microbiome. But there are a few key things to know about these dietary guidelines. So let's talk about that now. Here's the first thing to be aware of. Not all real foods are created equal. Here's what I mean. There's an obvious focus on eating real foods in these guidelines. We see this immediately in the website address for the guidelines itself, which is realfood.gov. There's also the first sentence, real food starts here, when you enter the website, and then related language surrounding the term real foods within the main guidelines document. Have you noticed this as well? Well, while it is true that eating more real foods is good, not all real whole foods are equally healthful, especially when it comes to promoting long-term health. This means we can't give a quote-unquote health halo around a food just because it isn't highly processed or manufactured from a factory. That's because each food comes as a package, just like the hamburger, fries, and soft drink combo meal you order at a fast food restaurant. Meats, dairy, and other animal-based foods, for example, provide protein, but can also be major sources of saturated fat and cholesterol, impairing heart health and increasing risk of many chronic diseases. Plant foods like beans, fruits, and vegetables, on the other hand, come packaged differently. When eaten, these provide a bundle of nutrients like fiber, vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, and key disease-fighting phytochemicals. So eating more of them will certainly benefit our bodies more. And that's what we see through research. Large epidemiological studies and prospective studies show plant-predominant diets to be associated with longevity, disease risk reduction, and an improvement in existing chronic health conditions. So a greater emphasis should be placed on eating more nutrient-dense, health-promoting plant-based protein foods to truly optimize health. In fact, the 2025 Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee also recommended a plant-forward way of eating as a key recommendation. This can be seen in their advisory report submitted to the Secretary of Health and Human Services and Secretary of Agriculture in 2024. In this report, it was recommended that the upcoming guidelines emphasize intakes of beans, peas, and lentils, and reduce intakes of red and processed meats. Because, and I quote, compelling evidence was noted in the systematic reviews in which dietary patterns that had higher levels of beans, peas, and lentils were associated with beneficial health outcomes. So while it is good that the new guidelines are emphasizing eating real food, this catchphrase runs the risk of being overgeneralized and vague. It is important to be cautious in how you interpret this message because not all foods are created equal when it comes to future health benefits and reducing risk of chronic diseases. This phrase should not be interpreted to mean that as long as a food item is not manufactured or comes processed or packaged, it is helpful to consume in unlimited quantities. Now here's a second thing you need to know. There are mixed messages on saturated fat within these guidelines. On the one hand, it is stated within the guidelines to limit saturated fat consumption to no more than 10% of total daily calories. However, on the flipped pyramid visual on the cover of these dietary guidelines, we see foods like cheese, full-fat milk, a piece of steak, and a block of butter being prominently displayed. This is despite dairy and meats being common sources of saturated fat and cholesterol in the American diet. And remember the visual that pops up when you first log into the realfood.gov website? It's broccoli, whole milk, and a whole piece of steak. These images in the pyramid and on the website can subtly give the message to us that eating all these types of animal-based foods is fine, and that there's no need to really worry about the amounts eaten. And visually, this is reinforced by plant-based food sources and animal foods being featured in equal proportions in the inverted pyramid. I think we all know how powerful a picture can be. As the saying goes, a picture paints 1,000 words. Can you see how mixed messages on saturated fat are presented here? Yet a different picture is painted when we look at Canada's Food Guide plate, the United Kingdom's Eat Well Guide, and the Australian Guide to Healthy Eating plate. In each of these instances, we see a greater visual prominence given to fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and more plant-based protein sources like beans, chickpeas, and lentils. These visual aids will definitely impact consumer eating and buying decisions in a different way. A number of other professional organizations also recognize the mixed messaging and call for a stronger stance within the guidelines towards saturated fat. The Academy of Dietetics and Nutrition, for example, issued a position statement stating their concern that, and I quote, "There is an emphasis on butter, beef, tallow, red meat, and full-fat dairy, which is inconsistent with the recommendation of limiting saturated fat to 10% of total calories. Evidence shows that these foods are high in saturated fat, increasing the risk of cardiovascular disease." The Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine also issued a news release calling for the Dietary Guidelines for Americans to be modified to, and I quote, "eliminate confusion on saturated fat, specifying that it is in dairy products and meat and promotes heart disease and Alzheimer's disease." Having this kind of mixed messaging between the main guidelines and the flipped pyramid diagram can be really confusing for many. Here's one example of that. My sister lives in Singapore, close to my father, and visits him often. Well, a few days after these guidelines came out, my sister went to have dinner with him at his house. He eats a regular diet. She told me that during the dinner, our father gave her some soup made using fatty pork meat, and then told her, "The new health guidelines says it's okay to eat meat and fat." But that's the thing. Do these health guidelines truly say this? I'm trying to figure this out too. Actually, encouraging plant-based food sources over animal-based foods to lower saturated fat intake for cardiovascular health is one of the clearest recommendations within the scientific report of the 2025 Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee. Within the report, it is stated this, and I quote, "Evidence indicates that when reducing butter, processed and unprocessed red meat and dairy, substitution or replacement with a wide range of plant-based food sources is associated with cardiovascular disease risk reduction. These findings support recommendations to replace saturated fat-containing foods with plant sources, rather than other animal sources of saturated fat, for reduction in cardiovascular disease risk." Interestingly, though, these recommendations to encourage intake of more plant-based food sources over animal-based foods never made it into the final dietary guidelines document, nor did they get translated into the flipped new pyramid diagram. My question is, why not? According to the Background Scientific Foundation document to the Dietary Guidelines for Americans, it was stated that an independent evidence review process was conducted to address and correct deficiencies identified in the advisory committee report, as its analysis was framed through a health equity lens. Hence, many of the advisory committee's recommendations were not incorporated into the final dietary guidelines release. Yet, even if this was the case, we can't ignore the fact that the national guidelines of many other developed countries around the world, like that of Canada, Denmark, and the Netherlands, are in line with the Advisory Committee's recommendations, especially in the area of encouraging greater intakes of plant-based foods and plant-forward diet lifestyles. This is definitely something to reflect on. So today we took a closer look at the new 2025-2030 Dietary Guidelines for Americans and some recommendations worth applauding. But there are also some key things you should know about the guidelines. In today's episode, we looked at two of them. The first is this: realize that not all real foods are created equal. Each one, when consumed, has a health price tag to it. And secondly, be aware that there are mixed messages about saturated fat presented in the guidelines. But keep this in mind, this is just the tip of the pyramid. Pardon my play on words. There's a lot more I could say on these new dietary guidelines. That's why I've decided to do a part 2 to this topic, to share with you a few more key things you should know about them. We'll touch on protein as well as vegan and vegetarian diets more in the next part. So make sure to join me next episode as we unpack this topic more. I'll see you there. Thank you for listening to the Plant-Based Eating Made Easy podcast. If this podcast has helped you, please take a moment to rate and leave a written review on the Apple Podcast app or on iTunes. Knowing how this podcast has made a difference in your life never fails to light me up. I may also select your review to be read on the show. Remember that moving to plant-based eating can be simple and doable, even with your existing health challenges and busy lifestyle. If you have a plant-based diet question you'd like me to answer on the show, share that question with me using the contact options in the show notes. Thanks for joining me today, and I can't wait to connect with you again in the next episode. Until next time, keep plant-focused and thriving, my friend.